In a world saturated with perpetual noise, where digital alerts and the ceaseless hum of urban life dominate consciousness, there exists a state often mistaken for mere absence. It is not emptiness, but a profound presence, a destination for the soul. It is a quietude that transcends the simple lack of sound, offering a vast and welcoming sanctuary for the overwhelmed mind. This deep stillness is the space where the frantic, often critical chatter of the inner monologue finally subsides, allowing for a pristine clarity that is otherwise unattainable. It is here, in this peaceful expanse, that one can begin to untangle their own authentic thoughts from the dense web of external influences, expectations, and societal pressures. This unique form of quiet is not a void to be filled, but a rich, textured landscape to be explored. It acts as a perfectly still lake, reflecting the true state of one's inner world without the distortion of ripples. Within its gentle embrace, the sharp edges of anxiety can soften, and creative impulses, long dormant under the weight of daily obligations, can begin to stir and awaken. It is a fertile ground where seeds of insight can germinate, free from the invasive weeds of constant distraction and digital interruption. People seek it out, sometimes unknowingly, in the hushed reverence of an ancient library, the pre-dawn calm of a sleeping city, or the vast, breathing wilderness where the only sounds are those of the earth itself. Yet, its most powerful and accessible form is the one cultivated within, a portable haven available at any moment. Achieving this internal quiet is an intentional art, a gentle but firm turning away from the external world to listen inward. It is discovered not by chance, but by practice. It can be found in the focused rhythmic cadence of a breath during meditation, in the mindful absorption of creating art, or in the simple grounding act of walking in nature without a destination or a device. It is a practice of unburdening the self, of letting go of the compulsive need to process, react, and perform. In these precious moments, one is not escaping from life, but connecting with its very essence on a more fundamental, unfiltered level. The experience is deeply restorative, a complete recalibration of the entire being. It allows the soul to catch up with the frenetic pace of the body, fostering a sense of wholeness, integration, and profound, unshakable peace. This powerful stillness is not a luxury for the few, but a vital necessity for a balanced and meaningful existence, a vital reminder that in consciously letting go of the noise, one finally discovers the beautiful, unique music of the self. For more reflections on finding tranquility and depth in everyday life, subscribe. Join us on a journey to quiet the noise and listen to what truly matters. A coppery tang filled my mouth, the first sensation to pierce the fog. It was thick and warm against the invasive cold that had already claimed my fingers and toes. My tongue, clumsy and numb, found the jagged split in my lip, the source of the metallic flavor. I spat. A crimson flower blossomed violently on the pristine white canvas beside my face. Snow. It was everywhere, a soft, suffocating shroud. It packed my hair, slid under my collar like icy fingers, and melted against my cheek with a kiss that was almost tender in its finality. I tried to push myself up, to fight the gravity that pulled me into the frozen earth, but a bolt of fire lanced through my ribs, stealing my breath and pinning me back down. My vision swam. The world was a stark etching of white and grey. The indifferent sky, the skeletal branches of the birch trees, the endless, unforgiving ground. The silence was profound, a heavy weight that pressed down until I could hear the frantic drumming of my own heart, a desperate rhythm against the quiet. Memory was a shattered mirror, offering only fleeting, sharp-edged glints. The flash of a blade, a guttural cry swallowed by the wind, the sickening impact that sent me tumbling into the cold embrace of a deep drift. Now, there was only this stark reality. The slow, rhythmic pulse in my temples, the sting of frozen air searing my lungs with every shallow breath. And that taste, a constant, undeniable anchor to the present moment. It was the taste of my own life, vivid and brutal. The snow tried to wash it away, melting in my mouth with a clean, pure coldness, but the iron persisted, a stubborn testament. It was the flavor of the fight, the essence of the fall. It was the taste of being alive, however tenuously. Each breath was a tiny, defiant victory against the encroaching numbness. I closed my eyes, letting the two sensations merge on my tongue, one a promise of peaceful oblivion, the other a defiant, burning spark. Ilara pushed against the wind, a force so solid it felt like a physical wall. The world had dissolved into a churning chaos of snow. The short trek from the meteorological instruments back to the base, usually a simple 5-minute walk, had become a desperate struggle for survival. Her compass needle spun erratically, a useless toy in the magnetic fury of the blizzard. Every direction looked the same, an endless, blinding curtain of white. It was then she saw it. A flicker of darkness against the uniform pallor. She stopped, squinting, wiping ice from her goggles. It could have been anything. A trick of the light, a snow-dusted rock outcrop she hadn't noticed before. But as she watched, the darkness coalesced, taking on a definite form. It was tall, impossibly thin, and it stood perfectly still against the gale that threatened to tear her from her feet. A shiver, colder than the wind, traced its way down her spine. No animal she knew of would stand so exposed in a storm like this. It wasn't human. The proportions were wrong, elongated and unnerving. She took a hesitant step to her left, trying to get a better angle, and the shape mirrored her movement. It wasn't drifting with the snow, it was moving with intent. It was pacing her. Panic began to claw at her throat, constricting her breath into shallow, ragged gasps. The base couldn't be far, but in the disorienting vortex, it might as well have been on another continent. She abandoned all attempts at navigation and simply ran, plunging through snowdrifts that reached her thighs. She risked a glance over her shoulder. The shape was closer now, gliding over the snow with a disturbing, unnatural ease. It didn't run or walk, it flowed through the storm, a silent, dark river in an ocean of white. Its silhouette was clearer, sharp and angular, a stark anomaly in the soft, swirling landscape. A faint yellow glow punctured the gloom ahead. The outpost. Sobbing with relief and terror, she threw the last of her energy into a final, desperate sprint. She crashed against the door, fumbling with the frozen handle before tumbling inside. Bolting it shut, she slid to the floor, her back pressed against the wood, listening. The howl of the wind was the only sound. Minutes passed. Finally, she crawled to the small, triple-paned window and peered out. There was nothing, only the wild, indifferent dance of the snow. The shape was gone, leaving behind only a heart-stopping question in the deafening silence of her sanctuary. Was it the storm that had created the phantom, or had a phantom been using the storm as its cloak? The world outside was a symphony of desolation, conducted by a wind that screamed across the frozen plains. It was a sound that scraped away at the soul, a relentless scouring that promised an eternity of ice and silence. Within the small stone hut, however, a single point of defiance pulsed with warmth and light. Ilara fed another piece of seasoned birch into the hearth. The flames leaped, casting dancing shadows that made the cramped space feel both smaller and infinitely larger, a pocket of life carved out of the encroaching nothingness. Her hands, gnarled as the roots of the ancient oaks the wind had long since toppled, moved with a familiar, steady rhythm. Every log was a prayer, every stir of the embers an act of faith. This flame was older than her, and older than her grandmother before her. It was the last ember carried from a city now lost to the ice, a continuous thread of existence against the unraveling of the world. The howling outside knew this. It was not a mindless gale. It was a predator. It clawed at the window shutters and moaned down the chimney. whispering of futility, of the comfortable peace of giving in and letting the cold take her. Tonight, it was particularly vicious. The hut groaned under the assault, and fine dust of snow snaked in through cracks in the walls. The fire seemed to shrink, cowering before the onslaught. The howling rose in pitch, becoming a chorus of spectral wolves, a lament for all that had been lost. Ilara felt the chill seep not just into the room, but into her bones, carrying with it the old ache of loneliness. She thought of the faces she once saw in the flames, now faded memories. The temptation to simply close her eyes, to let the logs burn down to ash, was a siren's call in the storm's throat. But then, a particularly violent gust slammed against the chimney. A cascade of soot and ice fell into the hearth, threatening to smother the precious core of heat. A cloud of acrid smoke filled the room. Ilara lunged forward, her weariness forgotten. With a poker, she frantically cleared the debris, coaxing the struggling coals. She blew gently, her own breath a fragile counterpoint to the gale outside. For a moment, it was a battle of two breaths, hers warm and full of life, and the wind's a frigid, deathly exhalation. Slowly, a tiny flicker responded. It caught on a splinter of wood, then grew, tentative at first, then bold. The flame roared back to life, higher and brighter than before, pushing the smoke up the chimney and the shadows back to the corners. The light filled the room with a defiant golden glow. Outside, the howling seemed to lose its edge, falling back into a resentful moan rather than a triumphant shriek. Ilara sagged back onto her stool, her heart hammering. She looked into the heart of the blaze, seeing not just the past, but the stubborn, impossible promise of a dawn. The night was not over, but the darkness had been held at bay once more. One windy morning, the bird landed on the bamboo chime that hung from the balcony. Its insignificant weight caused one of the rods to touch another, producing a single note, clear and resonant, a tin that lingered in the cold air for an instant. Elias smiled. There it was, not a grand or scientific name, but a sound, a moment, a memory shared between the two of them. Tin. From that day on, it was no longer the bird. It was Tin. By calling him by name, even if only in his mind, Elias felt he was solidifying a bond. The name didn't describe the species, but the relationship they had built. It was a secret, a bridge built over loneliness, proving that naming something is, in essence, a way of loving it, of inviting it to be part of your own world. In the silent, fluid universe, where it had known only the constant warmth and the deep, rhythmic cadence of a maternal heartbeat, a sudden, inexorable pressure began. The walls of its world, once a gentle and constant embrace, tightened with a powerful rhythmic insistence, signaling the end of a timeless-seeming peace. The journey was involuntary, an overwhelming propulsion through a narrow, dark channel toward an unknown destination. Muffled sounds, once the soothing soundtrack of its existence, became sharper, more distinct. The comforting absolute darkness was suddenly shattered by an incomprehensible, blinding brilliance that seared its unopened eyes. The new world erupted in a cacophony of shocking sensations. Cold air, a stark and brutal contrast to the amniotic warmth, assaulted its delicate skin, causing it to recoil. Gravity, a force never before experienced, pulled at its tiny, flailing limbs with an unfamiliar and heavy insistence. It was a disorienting, terrifying transition from a state of perfect symbiosis to one of stark, vulnerable individuality. Amidst this sensory chaos, a primal, urgent command surged through its nascent being, a biological imperative that superseded all confusion and fear. This was the moment of fundamental change, the pivot upon which its entire existence would turn. An invisible, powerful force compelled its chest to expand in a way it never had before. The tiny lungs, which had only ever known the gentle ebb and flow of protective fluid, were suddenly and violently stretched by a frantic gasp of raw, cold air. It was a searing, shocking event, a fire that ignited from within, burning a painful yet vital path to life. This first inhalation was not a gentle sigh, but a desperate convulsive intake, the body's powerful instinctual response to the severing of its previous lifeline through the umbilical cord. It was the monumental moment the organism began to sustain itself, the first and most crucial act of true independence, and with that first, burning breath came the inevitable explosive release. The air, having done its vital work of oxygenating the blood for the first time, rushed back out, forced through the virgin larynx with untamed force. It produced a sound, a piercing, high-pitched wail that shattered the clinical silence of the room and echoed with profound significance. This was not a conscious communication, but a raw, visceral explosion of life itself. It was a protest against the cold and the light, a declaration of arrival against all odds, a powerful sound wave that announced its separate presence to the world. It was the sound that every waiting heart longed to hear, the definitive, irrefutable proof of a new soul, separate and whole, now breathing the same air as all those who had come before. In that single, sharp vocalization, a universe of potential was unleashed into existence. Later that evening, under the warm glow of a desk lamp, he studied the main family portrait again. His great-grandmother sat enthroned on a velvet chair, her children arranged around her. But something was different. Behind her shoulder, where there had been only shadowed wallpaper, now stood a translucent figure. It was a young woman, her form so faint it was like an afterimage burned onto the paper. Leo leaned closer, his heart thumping. He was certain she hadn't been there hours before. A smudge, a flaw in the old emulsion, he told himself, but a chill ran down his spine. Over the next few days, the apparition grew clearer. He could distinguish the delicate lace on her collar and the sorrow in her dark, pleading eyes. The unease morphed into a quiet obsession. He returned to the attic, sifting through brittle letters and diaries tied with faded ribbon. In a journal belonging to his great-aunt, he finally found a name, Ilara. She was his great-grandmother's sister, who had died tragically young. The family history spoke of an accident, but the private letters whispered of a forbidden romance and a family's cruel efforts to preserve its reputation. Ilara had been erased. As Leo painstakingly pieced together the truth of her silent story, he noticed a change in the photograph. The spectral figure's expression had softened, the deep anguish replaced by a serene, melancholic peace. One morning, he picked up the frame and saw that the space behind his great-grandmother was empty once more. Ilara was gone. She had not been a malevolent spirit, only a lost one, waiting for someone to read her story. The photograph had not been a curse, but a vessel, her final, silent plea across the decades. Elias watched the dust settle on the windowsill, a thin grey layer that covered everything in that dying world, seeping through the cracks and clouding the dim afternoon light. Inside the small apartment, the sound of Leah's dry cough was a constant punctuation on her guilty silence. Each coughing fit was like a needle in his conscience, a reminder of the choice that had brought him here, to a dead end built by his own fear. Years ago, fear had paralyzed him. A widower with a young daughter to protect, he had refused passage to the colonies, a risky gamble in an unknown new world. He had opted for the promised security of the city, a stable job and a guaranteed roof under the metal sky. Now that security was turning out to be a slowly deteriorating trap. The walls of the building were peeling like diseased skin. The water was rationed, and the job that was supposed to support them barely paid for the tasteless, synthetic food they ate. The promise of stability had turned into a sentence of stagnation. He looked at Leah's pale face, at her eyes that still shone with a resilience he felt he had lost, and the burden of his decision crushed him. He had protected her from the danger of the unknown, only to hand her over to a desolate, suffocating certainty. Security was an illusion, fear a terrible advisor. He realized with painful clarity that his attempt to avoid risk had been the biggest mistake of all. The real danger lay not in the journey, but in remaining motionless while the world collapsed around him. Back at the apartment, he picked up the only valuable object he had left, his wife's old pocket watch. He wouldn't sell it to buy the drugs that would only postpone the inevitable. He would sell it for a new bet, a clandestine passage, a dangerous journey towards the horizon he had once feared. The fear was still there, a chill down his spine, but now it was different, driven not by paralysis but by the urgency of hope. Looking at the sleeping Leah, he knew that the road ahead would be uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, it wasn't a road to the end, but to a chance. The silence of the polar expanse, once absolute, was now broken. For weeks, a relentless, unseasonable warmth had descended upon the ice cap, and the air, once sharp and sterile, carried the scent of wet earth and ancient cold. The great melt had begun. At the Northern Sector Research Outpost, scientists watched their instruments with a mixture of academic excitement and a primal growing unease. The ice, a static titan for millennia, was in retreat. It wept from a million new fissures, and its groans echoed across the tundra, not like the shifting of a sleeping giant, but the stirring of something waking from a long, enforced slumber. It was during a routine satellite survey that the anomaly was first spotted. Where a vast monolithic glacier had stood just a month prior, a colossal calving event had sheared away the ice wall, exposing a sheer cliff face. Embedded within it was a scar of impossible darkness, a shape that defied the random fractures of nature. A small reconnaissance team was dispatched. As they approached, the scale became apparent. It was not a geological formation. A vast, non-reflective surface, darker than any known rock, stretched for hundreds of meters, etched with intricate geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with a light just beyond the visible spectrum. Awe silenced them. They had stumbled upon a relic from a forgotten eon, a secret the ice had kept safe. Their wonder, however, was short-lived, replaced by a creeping dread. The object was not inert. A gloved hand placed upon its surface registered a faint, deep vibration and a subtle, consistent warmth that had no business existing in this frozen world. As the sun reached its zenith, a hairline fracture on the structure, previously invisible, began to seep a soft, viridian glow. The thing buried in the ice was not a tomb. It was a cocoon. The very thaw that had revealed it was now providing the catalyst for its reanimation. Back at the outpost, alarms shrieked as instruments detected a focused energy burst emanating from the site. A signal, coherent and repeating, broadcasting into the void. The teams scrambled back to their snowcats, the sense of monumental discovery curdling into sheer terror. The hum from the structure was now an audible, bone-jarring thrum that seemed to vibrate the very air. They understood then that the shifting climate had done more than just alter coastlines and disrupt weather patterns. It had unlocked a cage. The ancient ice had not been a feature of the landscape, it had been a prison. And as the world celebrated the first signs of a premature spring, humanity remained, blissfully unaware, that its warmth had just roused the planet's oldest and most patient predator. Ilara drifted through rooms where sunlight was filtered through silk curtains, turning the air to liquid gold. Every surface gleamed, polished marble floors reflected the ornate ceilings, and crystal vases held blossoms so perfect they seemed unreal. The air was heavy with the scent of tuberose and sandalwood, a perfume designed to soothe, but which only seemed to suffocate. She ran her fingers over a lacquered box, its mother-of-pearl inlay cool and lifeless beneath her touch. Each object was a masterpiece, a testament to a fortune so vast it could purchase beauty itself. But the opulence that surrounded her was as much a fortress as it was a home. Her favorite spot was the great bay window in the west wing, not for the view of the meticulously manicured gardens, but for the glass itself. It was a transparent wall, a delicate but absolute barrier between her world and the one beyond. Outside, she saw birds darting freely between trees and occasionally the distant silhouette of someone walking along the public road unburdened. She would press her forehead against the cool pane, her breath misting the surface and momentarily obscuring the perfect static view. In her reflection, she saw a woman draped in finery, a figure as curated and decorative as the room she occupied, a ghost in a golden mausoleum. The sound of his footsteps, heavy and deliberate on the marble, announced his arrival. Marcus entered smiling, a small velvet box in his hand. "For you, my love," he said, his voice smooth and proprietary. He opened it to reveal a sapphire necklace, stones so deep they seemed to swallow the light. He fastened it around her neck, the jewels cold against her skin, their weight a familiar, pressing reminder. To him it was a gift, a token of his affection. To her, it was another lock, another finely wrought bar for the enclosure that was her life. He admired his choice, his wife, his possession, all in one satisfied gaze. Later, alone again, she stood before a gilded mirror. The sapphires glittered cold and brilliant. They did not adorn her, they branded her. For a moment, the woman in the reflection wavered, the ghost she had seen earlier. But then something settled in her eyes. The despair did not vanish, but it sharpened into a diamond-hard clarity. She was not merely a sad woman in a beautiful house. She was a prisoner who had learned the precise dimensions of her cell. She met her own gaze, a silent vow passing between the woman and her reflection. The cage was real, its bars forged from love and luxury, but knowing its nature was the first secret act of rebellion. His gnarled fingers, stained with the ghosts of countless pigments, traced the jagged edge of the empty space. It was a small void in the heart of a shimmering cerulean sea, the final wound in the artwork. Everything else was there, the white cliffs, the emerald green hills, the sky blushing with a perpetual dawn. He could almost hear Lena's soft hum as she worked, her brow furrowed in concentration, her smile when she'd find the perfect shard. Her absence was a physical ache, a silence that the chiming of the old clock on the wall could never fill. For a decade, finishing it felt like a betrayal, an acceptance he was not ready to make. From a small, velvet-lined box, he retrieved the final tessera. It wasn't a perfectly cut piece of Italian glass like the others. It was a fragment of sea glass, worn smooth by the ocean, that Lena had found on their last walk along the shore. Its color was an indistinct blue-green, the color of her eyes in the shifting light. This was her piece. Today, placing it was not an act of surrender, but of preservation. He mixed a small dab of adhesive, the familiar sharp scent a balm to his old grief. With a hand that trembled only slightly, he lifted the smooth glass. He pressed it gently into the waiting space. It clicked into place with a quiet finality. Elias stepped back, his breath held tight in his chest. A sunbeam, as if on cue, found the new piece, and it flashed with an inner light, a soft, milky glow that seemed to breathe life into the entire seascape. The mosaic was finished. It was magnificent, a testament to their love and skill. Yet, it was also a monument to loss, its beauty forever tinged with the sorrow of its creation. The dream of growing old beside her, their hands still working side by side, was irrevocably gone. But as he looked at the complete image, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek, he felt a quiet settling in his soul. The work was done. Her memory was now sealed in light and color, a beautiful finished story of an unfinished life. The ribbon gave way with a soft sigh, releasing its charge. The sheets within were not uniform. Some were thick, creamy vellum, others thin, almost translucent onion skin. They were covered in an elegant looping script, the ink varying from a deep sepia to a ghostly grey, as if the writer's passion had ebbed and flowed with the words committed to the surface. These were not mere documents or ledgers. They were fragments of a life, a mosaic of unsent letters, diary entries, and the beginning of a novel that would never be finished. The letters spoke of a clandestine love, of meetings by a moonlit lake, and promises whispered in the shadows of a grand old house. Dates marked the passing of seasons, from a hopeful spring to a melancholic, resigned autumn. Each page he turned was a step deeper into someone else's past. There were descriptions of a city now changed beyond recognition, a world without the insistent hum of modern life. He could almost hear the scratch of the fountain pen, feel the weight of the writer's hand as it poured out longing and despair onto the page. Some passages were blotted, the ink feathered and blurred, a silent testament to fallen tears or a moment of overwhelming emotion. The bundle was a time capsule, a silent testament to a heart that had once beaten as fiercely as his own. The names were unfamiliar, the places consigned to memory, yet the emotions were universal and timeless. It was a tangible piece of history, not of great events, but of the intimate, quiet moments that truly constitute a life. He carefully reassembled the stack, the fragile papers whispering against one another like dry leaves. He did not retie the ribbon. To do so would feel like a betrayal, like closing a tomb on the voice that had so briefly and powerfully spoken across the years. The fragile collection now rested on the polished wood of the desk, no longer a forgotten relic, but a living presence, a fragile bridge connecting two separate moments in time. He was an artisan of legend, a man whose name was synonymous with grandeur and permanence. His bridges defied the widest rivers, and his cathedrals seemed to converse with the clouds, yet within his genius lay a corrosive pride, a conviction that his vision was singular and infallible. He saw counsel as the chatter of the mediocre and collaboration as a dilution of his essence. This belief led him to push away all who were close, seeing their concerns not as love, but as chains on his ambition. His final masterpiece, his magnum opus, was to be a spire so tall it would cast a shadow over every other human creation, a testament not to gods or kings, but solely to his own mind. He designed it in solitude during feverish nights, fueled by wine and a profound disdain for a world he felt was too small to contain him. His most loyal apprentice, a young man he had raised like a son, presented alternative plans, pointing out the instability of the chosen ground and the sheer audacity of the design. Elias, in a fit of rage, shattered the young man's models and banished him from the workshop, accusing him of envy and betrayal. His wife pleaded with him to slow down, to remember the family he was sacrificing at the altar of his ego. He turned a deaf ear, seeing her only as another distraction from his glorious purpose. The end did not arrive with a thunderous roar, but with a low, gut-wrenching groan from the earth. One windless night, a deep grinding sound echoed from the bowels of the structure, then a sharp crack followed by a cascade of splintering stone. It was not a spectacular fall, but a slow, agonizing collapse, as if the spire itself were exhaling its last breath under the impossible weight of his hubris. It crumbled inward, an implosion of pride and mortar. He watched from his window, not with shock, but with a chilling, hollow clarity. Every falling block was an echo of a choice he had made. The dismissed apprentice, the ignored wife, the scorned advice. In that moment, he understood. He had not built a tower. He had meticulously engineered his own desolation. In the dusty silence that followed, he walked through the ruins, the sole inhabitant of the landscape his arrogance had sculpted. He was, at last, the master of all he surveyed, a kingdom of shattered stone and silent regret. Elias watched the asphalt shimmer, a heat-hazed ribbon unfurling toward a horizon he hadn't seen in over a decade. The city, with its concrete canyons and ceaseless grinding noise, had finally been shaken from his rear-view mirror. It was replaced by an ever-expanding sky, impossibly blue, and the tawny gold of sunburnt hills that rolled on forever. Each mile marker he passed was a bead on a rosary of regret and quiet hope, counting down the distance to a life he'd so carelessly, so arrogantly abandoned in his youth. The air inside the car was stale, recycled, a stark contrast to the vivid memories flooding his mind. Memories that smelled of sagebrush after a sudden storm, of sweet hay stacked high in the barn, of his father's calloused, leather-gloved hands. He had run from that life, convinced his destiny lay in glass towers and the frenetic energy of ambitious crowds. But the ambition had soured over the years, leaving an ache deep in his bones that no promotion or fleeting city distraction could soothe. It was an ache for vast open space, for a profound silence broken only by the whisper of the wind through the pines, for the familiar rhythmic creak of the old porch swing at dusk. He finally made the turn, leaving the smooth, indifferent highway for the jarring rattle of the gravel lane. This was it, the true beginning of the final stretch. The dust, a fine red powder, plumed behind his tires like a persistent ghost of his own making. He found he knew every curve, every dip, every crooked fence post held upright by stubborn wire and sheer will. To his right stood the ancient, lightning-scarred oak, a silent monument to his childhood adventures and broken promises. He slowed the car, a knot tightening in the pit of his stomach. The land was the same, unchanged and unjudging, but was he? Then, cresting the last rise, he saw it. The ranch house, low and rambling, was settled into the land as if it had grown there from a seed. Its white paint was more peeled than he remembered. The roof a little more swayed under the weight of seasons, but it stood defiant, a bastion of permanence in his transient world. A single light glowed in the kitchen window, a warm golden beacon against the encroaching twilight. He pulled the car to a stop beside the barn, the engine's sudden silence deafening, immense. For a long, suspended moment, he just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, a stranger at his own gate. The screen door of the house creaked open, and a silhouette emerged on the porch, gaunt but unmistakable. His father. He didn't wave or call out, just stood and waited. Taking a deep breath that tasted of dust, time, and homecoming, Elias opened the car door and stepped out onto solid ground. The betrayal came from one of its own. Joaquim Silverio dos Reis, an indebted landowner, saw the denunciation of the conspiracy as his chance of financial salvation. He went to the Viscount of Barbacena, governor of the captaincy, and revealed all the names, plans, and meeting places in exchange for forgiveness of his large debts to the crown. The authorities' response was implacable and silent. One by one, the leaders of the uprising were arrested, taken by surprise by the efficiency of the repression they had underestimated. The judicial process that followed was long and farcical, conducted in Rio de Janeiro, far from the center of the conspiracy. In front of the judges, most of those involved denied their participation or minimized their role. Only one man took full responsibility, standing out as the great leader and creator of the movement, Ensign Tiradentes. His courage sealed his fate. While the richest and most influential conspirators had their death sentences commuted to perpetual exile in the Portuguese colonies of Africa, he was sentenced to hang. His execution in the public square on April 21, 1792, was a brutal spectacle designed to serve as a stern warning to anyone who dared to challenge Portugal's power. His body was butchered and his limbs displayed along the Estrada Real. The seed of independence, however, had already been planted in the fertile soil of that mountainous land.